In the beginning, there was nothing, not darkness, not light, not even silence, only chaos. And chaos was not destruction. It was not fire or void or ending. It was simply what existed before existence learned its name. No shape, no time, no memory. Just endless possibility, drifting without direction. And in that endless drifting, something began to shift. Not suddenly, not like a creation, but like a thought forming inside something that did not yet know it was thinking. From chaos came the first presence, Nyx, night. She did not arrive, she unfolded. Like ink spreading through water that had never known color, she filled the emptiness without resistance. And where she appeared, chaos did not disappear. It simply became quieter. Nyx was not fear. She was comfort. The first comfort that existence had ever known. And in her presence, something else was born. A rhythm. A slow, invisible heartbeat of reality itself. Time had not yet formed, but it was already beginning to remember itself. From Nyx came Erebus, a deeper darkness. Not absence, but depth. And between Nyx and Erebus, the first balance existed. Not light and dark, but awareness and stillness. And in that stillness, the universe began to dream of structure. Far beyond them, where nothing had yet taken shape, a presence stirred. Kronos. Not the god of time, as mortals would later know it, but the pressure of time itself beginning to exist. He did not move forward or backward. He simply existed as the idea that things could change. And with that idea, reality gained its first direction. Still, there were no worlds, no sky, no earth, no sea, only unfolding possibility. And from that possibility, the first separation occurred. Above and below, form and formlessness, beginning and what had not yet begun. And the universe began to divide itself into dreams that would one day become reality. From the depths of this forming existence, Gaia emerged. Earth, not as a planet, but as a feeling of grounding, a weight that said, here, something will stay. And where Gaia existed, something new became possible. Life that could remain, not drifting, not dissolving, but existing. Yet existence without motion is still incomplete. And so the cosmos continued to breathe itself into form. From Gaia came the Titans, not gods as rulers, but as forces, shaping reality without knowing it. Each one a principle, each one a rule the universe would one day obey. Oceanus, the endless flow. Hyperion, the first light before light. Coeus, the question of knowing. Creus, the structure of boundaries. Iapetus, the quiet weight of mortality. And among them, Kronos grew stronger. Time was no longer just a feeling. It was becoming something that could consume. A force that would one day devour even its own children. But not yet. Not yet. For now, everything was still forming. And in this forming world, something soft began to emerge. A sensation that did not belong to the Titans, nor to Gaia, nor even to chaos. A sensation of rest, of surrender, of closing awareness without fear. This was not sleep, not yet, but it was the shape sleep would one day take. And where there is rest, there must be something that keeps it. From the deepest fold of Nyx, another presence emerged. Not loud, not powerful, but inevitable. Hypnos, sleep.
He did not rule, he did not command. He simply arrived when everything else became too heavy to continue holding itself together. And where Hypnos existed, the edges of consciousness began to blur. Thoughts softened. Time slowed. Reality loosened its grip. But Hypnos was still young in the cosmos. Sleep had not yet learned its full language. And so the universe continued to grow. Civilizations of forces formed in silence. War had not yet been invented, but tension existed. Love had not yet been named, but something still pulled things together across impossible distances. And somewhere, within the unfolding layers of existence, humanity was already being prepared. Not as beings yet, but as a possibility. A question the universe had not yet asked aloud. And in that question, the first hint of dreams appeared. Dreams that did not belong to anyone. Dreams that simply drifted. And from those drifting dreams, a figure began to take shape. Not fully formed, not fully real, but closer with every passing moment. Morpheus, the shaper of dreams. He was not yet known, not yet named, but he already existed in the space between thoughts, where images form without words, where emotions exist before understanding, where sleep becomes something more than rest and becomes a world. Morpheus did not create dreams. He gathered them. He shaped them slowly, like water held in hands that never close too tightly. And as he moved through the growing cosmos, something extraordinary happened. The universe began to practice dreaming. Stars that had not yet been born dreamed of burning. Oceans that had not yet formed dreamed of depth. Mortals that had not yet existed dreamed of forgetting. And everything that would one day live began to learn how to let go. And Hypnos watched this silently, because sleep, too, was learning. Learning that it was not an end, but a return to softness, to absence of weight, to the quiet place where nothing demands anything from you. And in that quiet place, all things become possible again. Chaos did not disappear. It simply rested beneath everything. Nyx did not leave. She became the background of all dreams. And Chronos, even time itself, softened when touched by sleep. Because even time cannot resist forgetting itself for a moment. And so existence continued, not rushing, not collapsing, but drifting, ever so gently, toward rest. And somewhere, deep within that drifting universe, sleep was finally complete, not as an idea, not as a force, but as a presence, one that would one day hold every living being and gently whisper them back into themselves. And in that whisper, everything becomes quiet. Everything becomes light. Everything becomes sleep. And as sleep settled into the fabric of existence, something new began to stir. Not above, not below, but in between. A place that did not belong to gods, nor to time, nor even to dreams. A place that would one day belong to those who could feel. For the first time, the universe began to wonder what it would be like to be fragile. From the quiet balance of all things, something delicate began to form. Not vast like chaos, not eternal like Nyx, not powerful like the Titans, but temporary. And because it was temporary, it was precious. The idea of mortality entered the dream of existence, and with it came something even stranger: emotion. Not yet fully shaped, not yet understood, but already deeply felt. There was a pull between things that had no reason to be drawn together. There was a quiet ache in things that had never known loss. And from this invisible tension, a new story began to write itself. The story of those who would one day live and forget. Far beneath the growing weight of time, and far beyond the reach of the Titans, the world began to soften once more. Because where there is life, there must also be escape. And in the quiet corners of existence, where even dreams grew tired, Hypnos returned, not as something new, but as something now needed. And beside him, moving without sound, Morpheus followed. Together they did not speak, they did not command. They simply waited. Waited for the moment when consciousness would become too heavy, when thoughts would begin to fade, when the mind would ask for rest without knowing how to ask. And that moment came sooner than anything expected, because existence was becoming complicated. Time was no longer just flowing, it was accumulating. Memories began to form, and with memory came weight, and with weight came the need to let go. So the first minds, though they were not yet human, began to close, not in fear, not in weakness, but in surrender. And when they did, Hypnos gently touched them, not with force, but with permission. And Morpheus stepped forward. For the first time, dreams were no longer wandering. They were being shaped. Soft images began to appear, things that did not exist, yet somehow felt real. echoes of places that had never been seen, feelings that had never been lived. And the sleeping minds began to drift deeper, not into darkness, but into something softer. A second world, a world where nothing needed to make sense, where time did not follow, where weight disappeared. And for the first time, sleep became an escape. Not from danger, not from fear, but from existence itself. And the universe allowed it, because even creation needs rest. Even time needs to forget. And even reality needs a place where it can loosen its hold. So the cycle began: wakefulness and sleep, form and release, memory and forgetting. And somewhere between all of it, the first true dreamers were being born. Not as gods, not as forces, but as something far more fragile. Something that would one day feel everything and understand nothing, and still continue dreaming.
And as the first dreamers began to drift, the world around them slowly deepened. The earth was no longer just a presence. Gaia had begun to feel. Not as mortals would one day feel, but in slow, ancient pulses. Mountains rose, not in violence, but in quiet certainty. Rivers moved as if remembering a path they had never learned. And above it all, the sky stretched endlessly. Uranus, vast, distant, watching without eyes. And between Gaia and Uranus, something began to grow. Not just life, but stories. Stories that had not yet happened, but already existed somewhere in possibility. And time, Chronos, continued his silent movement. Not rushing, not stopping, but carrying everything forward. Even the things that were not ready. And deep beneath the surface of the forming world, another presence waited. Hades. Not as a ruler, not yet, but as a place, a depth, a quiet certainty that everything that begins must one day rest. And strangely, there was no fear in this, only stillness, because death had not yet been named, and so it did not hurt. It simply existed, like sleep. And above, life continued to gather itself. Forms became clearer, movements became sharper, and somewhere between all of this, something fragile finally emerged. Humanity. Not as it would one day be, but as a breath, a brief flicker in the endless rhythm of existence. And with humanity, everything changed. Because for the first time, things could be lost. And for the first time, things could be loved. And far from the silent depths of Hades, and far from the distant gaze of Uranus, a new presence stirred. Persephone. She did not arrive with power. She did not reshape the world. She simply existed. And where she existed, something impossible began to grow. Beauty. Not the kind that lasts forever, the kind that fades. Flowers opened, knowing they would close. Seasons began to shift,
without understanding why. And for the first time, the world began to change in cycles. And Demeter felt it. Not with eyes, not with thought, but with something deeper, a connection that could not be explained. And as time moved, as Kronos continued forward, that connection would one day be broken. But not yet. Not yet. For now, the world was still soft, still learning, still dreaming. And somewhere, far from gods, far from earth, a sound almost formed. Music. Not heard, but felt. And from that feeling, another dreamer took shape. Orpheus. Not yet a man, not yet a legend, but already carrying something rare. The ability to touch what cannot be held, to reach into the unseen, to almost bring something back. And the universe listened. Because now, dreams were no longer just escape. They were becoming bridges between what is and what is lost, between life and what waits beyond. And Hypnos watched more closely now, because sleep was no longer just rest. It was becoming necessary. And Morpheus moved more gently than ever, shaping dreams, not just from nothing, but from memory, from longing, from things that would never fully exist. And the dreamers drifted deeper, between Gaia and Hades, between Kronos and Nyx. They floated, carried by something they would never understand, and yet they did not resist, because somewhere deep inside they already knew this is where they belong. And as the dreamers continued to drift, the world began to change in quieter ways. The light no longer stayed. It came and it went. Days formed, and then they faded. And in those fading moments, something gentle began to disappear. Persephone. She had always been there, like spring that never questioned its own arrival. Flowers followed her, soft colors opened where she walked, and the world felt alive because of her. But even beauty cannot remain untouched by time, and far below, in the silent depth that had always existed, Hades waited. Not in hunger, not in cruelty, but in inevitability. Because everything that blooms must one day rest. And one day, without warning, without sound, Persephone was gone. No cry, no struggle, just absence. And the world felt it. Flowers closed before their time, the air grew still, and something unfamiliar spread through existence. Loss, the first true loss. And Demeter felt it immediately, not as a thought, but as a break. Something that had always been whole was no longer there. And for the first time, the world began to search, not for meaning, but for return. Seasons shifted without rhythm. Cold touched places that had only known warmth. And time, Kronos, did not stop.
He carried the loss forward like everything else. But beneath it all, far below the surface of everything that lived, Persephone had opened her eyes. In the dark, not a violent dark, not an empty one, but a quiet, endless depth. And there, Hades stood, not as a captor, not as a monster, but as something that had always been waiting, a keeper of endings. And strangely, there was no fear, only stillness, because in that place, nothing rushed, nothing demanded. Time felt different there, slower, softer, almost like sleep. And Persephone felt it, not as a prisoner, but as something changing. Above, the world continued to search. Demeter moved through the earth, not with steps, but with longing, calling without sound. And everywhere she passed, life began to fade, because without what was lost, nothing felt complete. And the dreamers, even in their sleep, felt it too. A quiet sadness they could not explain, a sense that something beautiful was missing. And in their dreams, Morpheus began to shape something new. Not escape, but memory. Soft images of warmth, of light, of something just out of reach. And they followed it, not knowing why, not needing to know. Because dreams do not ask questions. They simply guide. And slowly, gently, something began to return. Not fully, not completely, but enough to be felt. Persephone would not be gone forever, because even in darkness, even in endings, there are cycles, and the universe had already learned how to begin again. And so it waited, not in urgency, not in fear, but in quiet certainty, because everything that leaves finds its way back differently. And in that waiting, the dreamers drifted deeper, closer to the place where all things soften, closer to sleep.
And as everything slowly began to settle, the world no longer tried to hold itself together. It no longer needed to. The cycles had formed. The stories had been told. The losses had been felt. And now everything could rest. Even the things that once resisted. Time, Chronos, no longer pressed forward. It drifted, softly, like everything else. And the earth, Gaia, exhaled. Not loudly, not all at once, but slowly, as if releasing something it had carried for too long. And above the endless sky, Nyx remained, unmoving, unchanging, but no longer empty. Now she was full of every dream that had ever been dreamed. And within her, something gentle moved. Hypnos. Not arriving, not leaving, simply present. Where he touched, everything softened. Edges disappeared. Thoughts slowed. And resistance faded. There was nothing left to hold on to.
and nothing that needed to be held. And beside him, Morpheus moved like a quiet current, not shaping dreams anymore, but dissolving them. Images faded into softer images, thoughts into feeling, feeling into silence. And the dreamers drifted, deeper and deeper, not falling, but floating, held by something they did not need to understand, something that asked nothing from them. And one by one, everything began to disappear. Not suddenly, not completely, but gently, like a memory you no longer need to remember, like a thought that lets itself go. The world faded, the sky faded, the stories faded. Even the feeling of being became lighter and lighter and lighter, until there was almost nothing left. And in that near nothing, there was peace, a quiet that did not feel empty, a stillness that did not feel alone. And far beneath everything, far beyond everything, chaos remained, not as a beginning, not as an end, but as a place where everything can rest. And now, so can you. There is nothing you need to follow, nothing you need to understand, nothing you need to hold. Just this soft, endless drifting